Thank you, everyone, for joining this roundtable on green budgeting. Special thanks to the participants in US and Fiji who have joined despite the odd hours. So the objective of the roundtable is to continue with the collaboration between the governments, the UNDP and the IMF on the green budgeting and how to take that agenda forward. So I won't take much of your time. We'll immediately request Radhika ji from UNDP and Olga from IMF to share a few remarks, and then we can move on to the presentations. But what I'll request is to all the presenters to try and stay within your time limit, because otherwise, I mean, it's late for some people, some colleagues, and it might become quite difficult for them to stay on. So over to Radhika ji, and then Olga for the introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Saji, and thank you, colleagues. On behalf of UNDP, I'm very pleased to offer a warm welcome to this Asia Pacific Roundtable, which builds on a previous set of regional roundtables that were organized around budget tagging to look a much broader set of issues across the budget cycle on green budgeting. And we are very honored to have representatives from the Ministries of Finance of Bangladesh, the Philippines, Nepal, and Indonesia, and from the Ministry of Economy and Finance from Cambodia, the Planning Commission of a Ministry of Climate Change from Pakistan, to share their reflections on what works and what doesn't, and what are some of these emerging opportunities. For us, now more than ever, as countries seek to find fiscal space to build back better and greener from the COVID crisis, but also in the lead up to the COP next year, green budgeting is and the sort of systems-oriented reforms which inform it are absolutely critical, not just for channeling resources in that regard, but also for mobilizing new, more earmarked resources which speak to these goals. And with that, let me, one last word of thanks actually to our partners from and funders from FCDO and from CEDA, who are the ones who support the Climate Finance Network in UNDP, which takes this peer-to-peer knowledge sharing and technical support as its very foundation. So we just want to thank them. They're here with us, but to thank them for really the support in making this kind of engagement at country level possible. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Holger van Eden. I'm the IMF's Regional Public Financial Management Advisor based in Bangkok. Warm welcome to all of you. I'm representing the IMF's PFM, Public Financial Management 2 division from the Fiscal Affairs Department. It's a great pleasure to co-host this workshop on green budgeting with the UNDP. We hope to hear some of the new country experiences which are emerging, the successes, but also the failures in this relatively new area of budget management. The IMF over the last 5 years has really strengthened its focus on climate change and environmental issues. We've always had a great focus on energy subsidy policies, but in recent years we've done a number of studies on carbon pricing and on and we're now moving into the area of green budgeting and also in the area of greening the public investment management methodologies that are available to countries. On the analytics side, we've had Fiscal Monitor, one of the key publications of the Fiscal Affairs Department, focusing on climate change mitigation. And this year, of course, there was a large focus in the Fiscal Monitor on greening the recovery, to what to do after the initial phase of COVID is over, and the most of the emergency measures have been taken, how to climb out of the economic downturn that is occurring at the moment. On green budgeting, it's a relatively new field, and I think one of the challenges which I think the field has in similar to gender budgeting is how to integrate green budgeting really into the budget process, not to have it as an add-on to the regular budget process. So we'll hope to hear some of the institutional and process innovations that countries are experimenting with at present. This session is for learning and for hearing what is happening in the Asia Pacific region, but also in other countries such as France. We hope that this is a useful and productive session, and I wish all the presenters success with their presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Radhika ji, and thanks, Olga. So I'll now request Claude Wenling from the IMF to make his presentation on the IMF perspectives on green budgeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Azad. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to speak on this topic of green budgeting to such a vast and competent audience. What I wanted to stress in my initial presentation was to give some first thoughts from IMF on green budgeting. One important point which I first want to stress is the importance of green budgeting for us, so seen from the IMF perspective. So green budgeting is really key because indeed PFM practice can really help in achieving green and climate change commitments. So green budgeting really for a purpose. And what we see currently, and my colleague Holger already alluded to that, is that green budgeting practices are at this stage still relatively scarce or non-existent in most countries. This is changing even relatively rapidly, but the stocktake that we have in advanced economies through the OECD or through our own set of analysis, which is notably conveyed through the fiscal transparency evaluations, which we are doing. Well, there is not, on average, much information which can be named green budgeting in budget document and which informs the budget process. And for example, in the fiscal transparency evaluations, which as IMF we do regularly to assess the transparency of budgeting and reporting processes, we find out that only 25% of countries give some information about environmental and disaster risks. And one other clue is that for the time being, in the context of our overall CD work, overall capacity development work at the IMF, we still have very limited demand originating from our main interlocutors in ministries of finance on this topic. We have a lot of work on fiscal risk, on budget preparation as a whole. We even are involved in quite a lot of countries in gender budgeting now, but green budgeting is still, for our CD, a largely new area. So how are we entering this green budgeting topic? As Holger already stressed, our approach is very much informed by the idea of the budget cycle. The budget cycle, which starts with a fiscal framework, which covers stages from budget preparation to budget executions and accounting and reporting, and finally control and audit. Each of these stages and phases feeding into each other, and the whole underpinned by a legal framework. And what we are trying to identify is how best at each of these stages, green budgeting practices can inform the work, can inform the decision making. And well, if you see fiscal framework, we are starting to see in some countries environmental targets and objectives, but more at a broader planning level. Green medium-term fiscal targets are a possibility, but very rare. Management of environmental fiscal risks, I also already talked about that, and we see in a few countries elements in their fiscal risk statements which are very detailed on management of environmental fiscal risk, and environmental issues may also be factored into long-term fiscal sustainability. And in budget preparation, we see some greening of budget circulars. We see some examples of green budget documentation. I think this will be further discussed in several of the presentations which we have today. And of course, we see the contribution of green targets and objectives in the overall program and performance budgeting framework for countries who may have such a framework. With regard to budget execution, you have, of course, the issue of monitoring and reporting on green outputs and outcomes, which is very much linked to program budgeting frameworks. You have green tagging of expenditure, which we put here in budget execution. Also to remind that green tagging is not just about the preparation of the budget, which is often the stage where it is featured prominently, but it's also about the execution and tracking and reporting on the real results in terms of incurred expenditures with regard to green objectives. And last but not least, control and audit, and to what extent do Court of Accounts take into account environmental concern in their external audit? Do some countries put in place independent climate watchdogs with a specific mandate, also covering PFM and budget issues? So that's, in a nutshell, all the stages which seem to us of interest and relevant for this integration of green budgeting practices into the PFM cycle. And to summarize and also to stress what we really think are the missing links and the interesting points, notably to take out of our discussion. One question which we have is, what are the capacity constraints for putting in place green budgeting, both in the Ministry of Finance and in line ministries? Because of course the PFM cycle is not just about the central budget authority, but it's also about line ministries and agencies, and the capacity issues can be on both sides. A second concern which we have, well, the green budget, the budget process, you all know, is underpinned by a strict legal framework and timeline, and yeah, it has to be kept effective. And how to integrate green budgeting practices, so add an element in the process while keeping the centrality and the effectiveness of the budget process. And last but not least, what is the actual impact of green budgeting practices, and which green budgeting practices are more likely to make a difference in terms of actual policy making? because green budgeting for transparency purpose is already a very, very good step, but the chief objective is to inform decision making. So this is a few questions which we think are really critical for future success of green budgeting, and on which we would really like that this roundtable may kick off rich discussions for the interest of all of us. I will stop here and thank you very much for your attention.
Excuse me, we can't hear you. Yes, so can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. So so basically, what we have been trying to do in Asia Pacific is to integrate climate change into the public financial management system, but more so making climate change part of the development debate. And in the last 6-7 years, this has actually gained currency with the ministries of finance and the ministries of planning. So the reason for doing the integration through the public financial management system was that we thought that because the budget process and the budget system cuts across all the ministries, and the way the budget system is structured, it will cater to issues starting from the overall fiscal framework to accountability, and then once you have that embedded in the public financial management system, the institutionalization will actually help in the sustainability of the reforms that you undertake. Yeah, so this basically, builds on the budget cycle, and that has been our approach to the reforms. So in many of the countries, and I'll identify in the later slide some of the work that we have done in different countries. The budgetary, we started with the integration of climate change at the budgetary and planning system. We looked at the legal and institutional frameworks, to what extent climate change was embedded in the policy framework. Was there a legal framework that supported integration of climate change? And then based on that, we developed the climate change financing framework for several countries, and the governments developed the climate change financing frameworks. And then based on that, the governments actually then brought about reforms in their budgetary system. For instance, the budget call circular also changed some of their planning requirements that required actually for climate change to be as one of the feature and a screening criteria. And then one of the key thing that has happened across the Asia Pacific country is putting in place the climate budget tagging system, which has helped in tracking the climate change expenditures. It started with the CPIR, but now the budget tagging system is definitely an improvement upon the climate public expenditure and institutional review. But even though budget tagging system is very important, but what we do feel is that there has to be a formal reporting mechanisms, and in many of the countries we have been able to formalize that reporting system through providing some technical assistance. And then the key to actually the whole equation or the budget cycle is that the expenditure analysis then informs the budget formulation process. So this is something which is evolving, it is happening, but this is also something which we feel should be further strengthened. And then, several countries, for instance, Nepal and Pakistan, have worked on engagement with the parliament, which in order to strengthen the accountability and oversight process. So you would see from some of the subsequent country examples that the governments have approached the whole climate finance reforms from two angles. One has been the bottom-up approach, and the other has been the top-down approach. The top-down, we say, where the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Planning have led the process. But they have introduced some system and process reforms, for instance, requiring the sector ministries to include climate change in their budget submission. And the other approach has been the bottom-up initiatives, which is basically that you start at the line ministry level, you look at the climate resilience angle, and then that serves as an evidence with the ministries of finance and ministries of planning to integrate climate change into the budget formulation process. And of course, this is guided by the climate change policies, the commitments, and for instance, the NDCs. And also through the climate change financing framework, or the overall development framework if it has a climate change component. But the ultimate objective is that the development policy and the sectoral policies do contain a climate change angle. So some of the country experiences, and as I mentioned earlier, some of the countries you would see was supported by government of UK. Some of these were supported by government of Sweden. And I'll just highlight a few examples, because we are going to hear from the government representatives who have actually been leading these reforms. So Bangladesh, for instance, is one of those countries which has developed a climate change financing framework. Nepal has developed a climate change financing framework. Pakistan has developed a climate change financing framework. So some of these you would see are a common thread. Similarly, the climate budget tagging is also a common thread between Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, and then Pacific is now embarking upon that. Then you would see that the climate change cost benefit analysis, which is working with the sector ministries to add risk into the budget, climate risk into the budget submission, has been happening in Cambodia. It has happened in Thailand. The risk resilience has also been added into the sector ministry in the Pacific. In Indonesia, this actually, the whole work around the climate change financing led to also mobilization of resources through the Green Sukuk. And then in India, for instance, the climate change was integrated into the local government or the state level budget. Similarly, two things that which we think the governments have actually sort of reached the pinnacle is the integration of climate change in the medium-term expenditure framework in Bangladesh, and integration of climate change in the medium-term budgetary framework in Pakistan. But of course, this is something that has to continue, and of course to be followed up by measuring the key performance indicators. So moving forward, we plan to work with our partners like IMF, World Bank, OECD, and other national key entities, the Training Institute, for instance, the EFI in Cambodia, which is the public sector institute. So on strengthening the climate change reforms, helping the government to continue that, but also looking at some innovative sources of finance, for instance, looking at carbon pricing, and that's something that we've already started to do in several countries, and also engaging the private sector, because we also feel that even though public sector resources are important, but they are not enough to address the climate change challenges. So also looking to engage the private sector, and then also looking at some of the macro economic impact of climate change, which will also help redefine some of the development and sector policies at the national level. So I'll stop here, and then I will request Mr. Soko from the Ministry of Rural and Maritime Development, Government of Fiji, to present the excellent work that they have been doing at the sector ministry level, and also how have some of those reforms connected to the wider reforms in Fiji. Thank you.
Thank you. Greetings from Fiji, from the Pacific. Welcoming our viewers from the Asian Pacific. My name is Soko Tuima from the Ministry of Rural Development, arm of government that coordinates rural development in rural Fiji. I'm happy to share our experiences in Fiji on green budgeting practices, and I understand that it is in considering a risk-informed development in the achievement of risk-informed development. And yet the Ministry of Rural Development, as part of our coordination for rural development, we target the sustainable and achievement of resilient rural communities. And through this, we work with the rural communities through the bottom-up approach planning, empowering them to take ownership of the community development through participatory. And government provides or funded community capacity building, empowering the community to identify their community needs. Through this process, the community developed the risk-informed development plan. And these development priorities are mainstreamed through the Ministry of Rural Development, our ministry, and we prioritize this development from the communities and submitted to the Ministry of Economy for budget consideration. I would like to share with us a project that was risk-informed through the bottom-up approach from a Nassau community farming project. This is a very remote community in Fiji, situated on the second largest island in Fiji, mostly depending on agriculture. surrounded by a stream, river. It is vulnerable to cyclone and landslide and flooding. And through the risk-informed community development plan that the community has identified, we have they have prioritized improving access to their community agriculture land as their top priority. And through our CCDRM that are positioning the division, we do road development project consideration, taking from the prioritization phase to the design phase to the implementation, and right through across to the oversight of the projects. And very critical to this, the success of this project is the divisional, the CCDRM officer that are placed, that works in the division, and also the adoption of the risk screening template that we have used for all our development program projects that we implemented. But two major risks that are identified in this project, one is for the potential for landslide, because there are strong chance of the new road washing out during heavy rainfall. And the second one is soil washed away from roadside could cause blocked drains and waterways. As a result of risk screening of the projects, government had to contribute an additional $3,500 to a $40,000 project that was initially funded, and this is about 9% of the total project cost. And through this risk screening, this farm was able to stood up to about 2 cyclones in 2019, when community continued to harvest tons of produce with minimal disruptions, whereas communities in other parts of Fiji and also nearby communities were cut off from their lands and sources of income. And through significant farm proceeds, which were channeled into village development priorities as an impact of risk screening, these farm road projects. Here we have photos of community involved in identifying the development needs, and also the risk screening that taken place on the project. We will note that the project had extra drainage depth so that it is able to cater for the draining of water during heavy rainfall. And also shown here is a chief smiling, showing how happy he is when for the first time a vehicle is able to reach out to their very remote community farm area. And also the community, after 2 years, after more than 1 year, they managed to harvest their crops right beside the farm road that was cut through this project. And I've shown here in this slide the impact of the resilient solar farm road, where the community was able to build a $200,000 value of bricks from their proceeds without any assistance from government. This was just commissioned lately. So this is a rippling effect of a project that was done right through the risk informing process. Here, what we have shown here very quickly, the bottom-up approach that we are involving, that we are using in the community, where the risk-informed design and implementation of farm road from the community, then it is mainstream up through the sub-national level, where the CDP training includes our CCDRM and social risks, and also through the dedicated CCDRM that are collocated in the divisional office. And this is also mainstream up to our ministry developing an SOP for risk screening. And we also managed to have some influence at the national level that all the bigger projects, the PSI, public sector investment projects, need to be risk screened, and we have provided a risk screen template for the Ministry of Economy for all ministries to use. What we have demonstrated here is the risk-informed approach to the Nasolo Farm Road project, where we are able to secure a resilient and sustainable project. And the beauty part of this is the bottom-up approach and participatory of the community make them take ownership of the project, and also in the accountability. Given that government is moved away from the project, they are able to do their own maintenance at their own cost, because they value it is their own project. And as I've shown earlier, it has some rippling effect into the community, where the proceeds from the farm, they're able to fund their own development priorities. So what we do, we wanted to replicate this, to replicate risk-informed approach to all our projects and all into other 3 divisions in Fiji, for all projects to be risk-informed. And the learnings that we have acquired from this project, from this Nasolo risk projects, we want to scale it up we are in the process of developing SOP for the approach to be applicable to all our CAPEX projects. And this is also for the whole ministry, and also to scaling up so that it also reaching the Ministry of Finance. And this is also what we have shown here from a very small CAPEX budget, and with the significance of this is the CCDRM relevant cost just about 9%, and they've shown the rippling effect that have occurred to the villages. So what we are working on at the moment, we are beginning with risk screening. We're working on risk screening and also creating a typology for weighting. And also the effectiveness and impact of programs and resource mobilization opportunities. How can development partners contribute to the risk management costs that we have shared already. Now, what the questions that we are seriously considering is, how can we influence national systems to adopt this approach? So what we are working on is the power of our demonstrations of the bottom-up approach, evidence-based planning and budgeting, and holistic system and capacity strengthening that will ensure that we have that we integrate these risk-informed development projects into the budget formulation process. And also we are also working towards our strategic development plan, which one critical element of it is the risk informing of all our development projects and programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very informative, Mr. Soko, and special thanks to you. I know it's a very odd hour in Fiji, and thanks for staying late. So we'll now request Mr. Farooquzzama from Ministry of Finance, Bangladesh, to make his presentation. And what I'll also request is that if you have any questions, please put those questions in the chat box. And then after Mr. Farooquzzama's presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. And I mean, you'll be also, you can also ask questions during those 15 minutes. But I mean, beforehand, if you want to put it, please put it in the chat box. And Emily Davis from UNDP will be managing the question and answer session. Thank you. Mr. Farooq, it's over to you, please.
Mr.
Yes,
Farooq,
thank you very much. I am very much grateful to the organizers to arrange this roundtable discussion on green budgeting. And this is the crucial for Bangladesh also. You know that Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. And you know that in the last 2 or 3 months, we have experienced 3 times. We have experienced flood for 3 times. That is very much unusual for our country, because in one season we can experience only 1 flood, but this year we have experienced 3 floods. So we find that the climate has become very much vulnerable in the near future also. So in this respect, this type of roundtable is very much crucial for Bangladesh also. So welcome to my presentation, translating systematic reforms into climate change responsive budget formulation. In this presentation, I will go for a few things. At first, I will go to the context of the climate finance reforms, and here I will discuss about how we have started the climate finance to integrate in our budgeting system. Then integration process and nature of integration into our budgeting, into our PFM system, from macroeconomic framework to the budget framework and budget reporting. That is throughout the budget process, how we are integrating climate change issues. And then I will also discuss about embedding climate dimension in our strategic documents and our auditing system. Auditing is also a very much important part of public financial management. And last, I will discuss about the challenges and opportunities of climate integration. The climate fiscal framework, the earlier UNDP presentations also, we have come from that Bangladesh has adopted climate fiscal framework. And this is the basic framework to integrate climate finance in our public expenditure management. And this was adopted in 2014. And prior to that, we have conducted a review, climate public expenditure and institutional review in 2012. And as the output of this review, we have adopted climate fiscal framework. And the objectives of this framework, the major objectives were prioritization of climate actions in the existing national budgetary framework. So with this objective, to implement this objective, we have launched a project, inclusive budgeting and financing for climate resilience. We call it IBFCR in 2016. And through this project, we have implemented a range of reforms to integrate climate policies and strategies in our public financial management system. So these are the context of our climate finance reforms. So what we are doing now to integrate, how we are integrating in our budget system. We have medium-term macroeconomic framework. That is the first part of our budgeting system. And we have made this medium-term macroeconomic framework as climate inclusive. We have embedded climate change variables in our macroeconomic model. And every year we publish medium-term macroeconomic policy statement, and in this statement also incorporate the climate change issues. And these the loss and damage due to climate change are discussed in the high-level policy making body with medium-term macroeconomic framework, and some policy insights also we see from this statement. And with following this macroeconomic framework, we try to allocate the resources, additional resources to fight our climate change issues. So following the macroeconomic framework, we issue budget circular for the line ministries, and the budget circular has directives for the line ministries to include their climate inclusive strategies and actions, and resource also are incorporated with the strategic objectives and actions that are taken by line ministries in line with their policies and their plans. We have many policies from perspective plan, 5-year plan, climate change strategy action plan, and also the policies of line ministries. For example, agriculture ministry has agriculture policy, environment ministry has environment policy. So all these policies are also incorporated with some climate issues, how climate can affect their activities or our national output. So in line with these strategies, we prepare the budget for ministry budget framework according to budget circular. So all the ministry budget framework, they have some structure. They have all the ministries have strategic objectives. They take these objectives following their policy documents, and in the strategic for all the strategic objectives, the line ministries put their impact of climate change of their strategic objectives, and along with the activities, they put resources, and from this allocation of resources, we track the climate finance through our IBUS system, our financial management information system, and output KPI also linked with these resources and the strategic objectives in our medium-term budget framework. So from the output and from KPI, key performance indicators, also we can calculate how much adaptive or how much mitigation process we are going through our activities on activities related to climate changes. And in the resource allocated resource, we track the climate financing using the help of our integrated budgeting and accounting system. That is a financial management information system of our country. We have prepared this IBUS in our country to capture the climate, not only climate finance, for this IBUS, integrated budget and accounting system. We prepare budget. We put all budgeting preparation in IBUS system. All the line ministries and agencies put their budget in IBUS++, and also in execution process throughout the financial year. We also use IBUS for fund release. So from fund release procedure, also we can track the climate change, climate financing part, how much climate financing are releasing, and after the year end, we also keep the accounting through this IBUS system, and from that system we can also track how much spending were related to the climate finance. This is the living document, so we can find the accounting after the financial year or within the financial year also. And this tracking also measured with the climate relevance criteria. We have Bangladesh Climate Strategy and Action Plan. We have adopted this 2019. In this strategy and action plan, we have formulated 51 climate relevance criteria that also include 44 programs under the 6 thematic areas of climate change or climate issues. So with these criteria, we formulate the public finance tracking system. And we have many documents related to budgeting. we have Bangladesh Economic Review. Every year we publish Bangladesh Economic Review and medium-term macroeconomic policy statements. And in the budget speech also in the month of June, when we place the budget in the Parliament, the Honorable Finance Minister also put emphasis on climate change issues in our budget speeches also. Recently, we have formulated a climate finance governance system, and a new audit protocol for climate performance audit has been introduced in our auditing system. Our Bangladesh, the Office of the Controller and Accountant General is responsible for auditing of public expenditure. So they have adopted this climate performance audit, and they have also introduced 2 guidelines to provide guidance to the auditors so that they can audit their climate performance. And some training manual also have been developed. Then all our climate financing framework are for the national level, but now the local climate financing framework are also have been drafted. This is just is waiting for a publication, and through this local climate financing framework, we can also adopt the planning in the lower local level governance system to incorporate the climate issues in their planning process. So challenges we face, that is one challenge is the capacity building. We have 25 line ministries we call climate relevant ministries. So all the ministries are still lack the capacity to embed climate finance dimensions. So we need more training and more IBAS training and budgeting training, and also how to incorporate climate system into the budgeting system. We need more training and more capacity. And also capacity for auditing also, because this is very new in our country. So auditing documents are also very much limited, so because very new. So performance, climate performance auditing and auditing related documents and auditing personnel. In both cases, we have some lackings. And also inadequate institutional arrangement, so that the line ministries can adopt the climate issues in their strategic documents and and their objectives, and how to incorporate in the projects. Every projects we put the emphasis or impact of climate, but there are some institutional arrangements, inadequate institutional arrangements, so that officials still in some ministries lack the knowledge of climate issues and climate budgeting issues. So we need the capacity building in this sector. But we have some opportunities. We have already adopted medium-term budgetary framework, and this framework is well established, and all the ministries can prepare their medium-term budget framework. So in this process, we use policies and resources. We incorporate policies and resources. So when we put integrate climate issues in our policies, so it is resource of, in this way, the resources are also allocated for climate issues. So this is our opportunities. So climate budgeting is, we can easily use climate budgeting for other ministries also. And IBAS system, integrated budget and accounting system, this is a robust financial management information system. Everything from budget preparation, budget execution to budget accounting, everything we can use this IBAS++. So from IBUS++, the climate financing tracking is very much easy. Where during the budget preparation process, our officials, they put the activities and resources and link with the climate issues, and the climate finance automatically tracked from this IBUS system. And our NGOs and our civil society organizations, they are very much aware, and our mass people are also very much aware about the climate issues, because we have long shorelines, coastal areas. The coastal areas are very much vulnerable, so people are suffering from climate changes. So people are also very much aware about the climate issues, and so they need climate budget, climate fund. So I think we also, not only climate budgeting, green budgeting, we also give emphasize on the how much climate financing we can pipeline to our national budget from the international organizations or United Nations, such as Global Climate Fund, so that we can fight our climate impact, climate change issues. So this is from my part, and if you have any suggestions, you are very much welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, colleagues. That was, thank you, Mr. Tuma and Mr. Deputy Secretary, for these presentations. We're going to take about 10 minutes now to have some question and answer and perhaps a brief discussion to respond to these two presentations. I think they brought up many of the rich experiences coming from Fiji and Bangladesh, and colleagues certainly have sparked some interest in asking questions or perhaps sharing about their own experiences aligning with these approaches. So we'll start first by going to Shan Mitra from FDCO. Would you like to unmute yourself, Shan, and ask the question you have in the chat?
Why don't you go ahead and just ask the question? That's fine if you're happy to do that.
Sure, I think that's fine, okay. Thanks. I think that that this question could go toward the two presenters we just heard from, and also perhaps it would be good to flag this to hear from our upcoming presentations. To respond to Cloud's question that was presented at the beginning of the session, what budget practices have made a difference to actual policy decisions or expenditure decisions? So with this, shall we go back to see if our colleagues in Fiji or Bangladesh would like to respond to this?
Yes, may I answer this question? The budget practice, we have medium-term budgetary framework. We prepare our budget as the medium-term framework. So this framework actually a very much pragmatic framework, which actually make a very much difference to actual decisions on policy or expenditure. Earlier, we were the traditional budget, and in that type of budget, we just every year we extend our allocations. We increase our allocations 5%, 6% or 10%. But in the medium-term budgeting framework, we have opportunity to discuss our national policies and national plans, and we ministries take their objectives, strategic objectives in line with the national policies or national plans. And with the strategic objectives, the line ministries take to achieve the strategic objectives, line ministries take activities. They have series of activities to achieve a particular strategic objective. And according to the activities, they allocate, line ministries allocate their resources or their funds. or their expenditures. So it is not necessary that every year we have to expand our expenditure. We may create new fiscal spaces also with the new strategic objectives and new activities. So this medium-term framework has made the difference in our decisions on policy and expenditure. And since we have to analyze our strategic objectives for allocation, we have this also create the opportunities to incorporate or to integrate the climate issues in our strategic objectives and in our activities also. So I think this MTBF practices have made this type of differences. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response. I'll ask if we can go to another colleague, Chol, who has a question for both presenters, and then perhaps we can go to Fiji to respond to that last question if there's any experience to share, and also this next one. Chol, will you like to unmute yourself and go ahead, please?
Yes, thank you, Emily. A couple of quick questions to Mr. Soko of Fiji and also Mr. Muhammad of Bangladesh. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation, very interesting. And I think these are good examples as well. The first question that I have is, when we think of integrating climate change into budget framework, climate information tends to be pretty scientific and very micro in nature. While on the other hand, budget type of work is pretty macro in nature. I was wondering whether you can share your experience in terms of how do you integrate that kind of information into, work at the ministry, and, is there any institutional challenges, and what kind of institution in your countries that you work with, to seek this kind of information in doing this kind of work. And the second question to both presenters as well, when we think of climate change and climate challenges, it's pretty forward-looking and it's pretty long-term into the future. But when we look at work on green budgeting, whether we do budget on an annual basis or even in the medium-term budget framework, looking out a few years ahead, what is your experience in terms of incorporating, kind of long-term information into a budget framework, which is more relatively short-term, relatively speaking, from the point of view of climate change. So these are a couple of quick questions to both presenters, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we go first to Mr. Tuma in Fiji to respond?
First question. Thank you. First, I'd like to address the first question that has been asked. For the experience that I've shared, what practices have led to changes in policy? What we have shared is the demonstrations on the multiple projects that had been risk informed and the success, and this has contributed to has influenced our management and our policymakers in to the adoption of this new policy. And also what we have shown is a strong leadership from the community and also at the subnational level, and the divisional commissioners and the role that they play in supporting the risk informing of development projects done at the community level. And also what we have shared is the climate change cost benefit analysis from the 9% of that result of risk informing the projects, and what impacts does it bring about into the projects, the sustainability, resiliency, and the rippling effect that I've shared. So these are some of the areas that I believe have contributed towards the adoption of the policy, the SOP for this. And the second question, probably the scientific area that the ministry is now developing a national rural database with the geospatial GIS, so that we are able to have improve our data establishment in the ministry, so that we can have a better coordination of rural development, and also linking to the Ministry of Economy for budget proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we go over to Bangladesh, to Mr. Deputy Secretary to respond?
Oh, yes, we in our system, our budget is prepared is a bottom-up approach. So from the bottom line, we give the preliminary resource of budget to the line ministries, and line ministries give it to the agencies and in the district level. So from district level, with their resource ceiling, they prepare their budget. So in which sector or in which activities they will put emphasis. This is this comes from the bottom up tiers from the district and upajilas and from agencies. So they know their field level situations, and on the basis of their field level situations, what kind of activities they should take, and what type of resources they need, they put to their agencies and their ministries, and the allocations are made in line with that. So this is our process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response. There's two more questions that have been put into the chat, so we'll go directly to those speakers. I believe to direct this back to Bangladesh. The first one is from Richard in Samoa. Richard, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, it's Richard from PIFTAC, the Pacific Financial Technical Assistance Center in Suva. We're doing the first P for climate change module. We're piloting it in Samoa. And I'm just on the indicator number 14, which looks at how expenditure has been defined and trying to identify that. So I just quickly wanted to get to this issue of tagging. How do you tag these climate expenditures practically in your system? Do you have something in your chart of accounts that aligns to those programs? Do you tick every transaction? I just want to get a quick practical idea of what you do. Over.
Thank you, Richard. Before we go back to Bangladesh, we'll go to Mr. Rolando Toledo in the Philippines to also ask a question back to Bangladesh, and then we'll go back for the last round. Mr. Rolando, do you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you. Yes, as is already stated in the chart, we just know on climate-exclusive medium-term macroeconomic framework of Bangladesh, what are variables being considered or factored in their MTFPF other than the regular macroeconomic indicators to consider it as a climate inclusive. So I might pick up there is there something new or other indicators other than what is our regular to consider in developing the macroeconomic framework? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go back to Mr. Deputy Secretary for these last two questions, and then of course back to Fiji if there's any final comment. Over to you.
In our country, we tag the climate finance using our climate relevance criteria for projects and activities. Following our climate change strategy and action plan, we have 51 relevance criteria and 44 programs under 6 thematic issues. We have 6 groups of climate issues, and we have weightage of different programs and different relevant criteria. So with that weightage, the activities or projects are treated as how much weight have been given out of the objectives of projects and activities, and with that relevant criteria, we measure how much, how percentage of budget is climate relevant budget. So in this way, we measure our climate public finance stagnant. And for second question, can I listen again? I could not hear clearly the second question.
It's just quickly understanding how you tag the climate change expenditure, whether you identify it at the chart of accounts level on particular programs, or are you identifying actual transactions and marking them off as climate change transactions? I just want to see at what stage you're doing it, how it practically works. Over.
Yes.
Okay. On my question, Mr. Farouk, is there any other variables being considered or factored in your medium-term macroeconomic framework other than the regular macroeconomic indicators in order for it to consider it as climate inclusive?
Well, in our macroeconomic framework, we are adopting to incorporate in our macroeconomic model to embed some climate change variables. This is still our initial stage. We still not replicate in our budgeting system, but we are trying to embed some climate change variables, and what type of variables we will take, we are examining these. And I hope that in near future, within 2 or 1 year, we can incorporate or we can find out some climate change variables to incorporate in our macroeconomic model.
All right. So this is still in development stage. So anyway, thank you. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. We're going to wrap up now so that we can keep going. Our colleagues in Fiji, we thank them again for the great presentation. They have to go and pack up now to make it out in time for curfew. So a big thank you to them again. Thank you so much to both presenters and for everyone for engaging in the discussion. So to move along, I'll pass back to Asad.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and also thanks to the presenters. So we'll now straight away go to Ministry of Finance Indonesia and request Ms. Dian Lestari, Director, Ministry of Finance, to make her presentation. And after her presentation, we'll request Mr. Rolando from the Department of Budget Management, Philippines, to make his presentation. And I'll request both the presenters that we have slightly behind time, so just I mean, if we can stay within the time frame. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Dian.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and the invitation. But unfortunately, due to another assignment, my director, Ms. Dian Lestari, cannot make it for this very prestigious event. Today I'm on behalf of her, I want to share our presentation on the climate change in national planning and budgeting, as we have experience a bit experience on how we may take our budget according to the climate change issue in our national planning and budgeting system. So anybody will share, or should I share my presentation now? Should I?
It seems like there's a notification saying that you're low bandwidth, so maybe we can share the presentation.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, I will share it, yeah, just to make it easier. Is it?
Okay.
Is it already there now? Oh, okay,
yeah.
yes. Yeah. So here's my presentation, and my outline will be on the everything will be based on our national commitment on the achievement of our change target. This is the first passage point on why we want to achieve our national target with regard to the climate change. And the climate budget taking mechanism in our state budget, I will share a bit about how the mechanism and the process of the climate taking and our experience so far. And the third is how we may relate the climate change with the innovative financing due to the as the result of the climate budget taking that we have conducted. We found some quite interesting findings. And at the end, I want to share our takeaways so far. Here's the change is something that is in our situation in Indonesia due to our vulnerability from the climate change, that 80% of our disasters occurrence in Indonesia as the result of the hydrometeorological disaster, which is coming from the impact of climate change. And due to the monetary value of the economic loss, it's about 14.8 billion US dollar, or it's about 132 trillion rupiah. And because of our archipelagic country, which comprise of more than 17,000 islands and covering areas with 790 million hectares, and with the total coastline length of 95,000 kilometers, and the land territory of about 200 million hectares. It was very, very highly vulnerable to the adverse impacts of the climate change. And that is the view from the adaptation side. And then have our commitment to tackle the climate change that according to our ratification of the Paris Agreement into our national law back to 2016, Indonesia has committed to reduce our greenhouse gas emission by 29% with our own effort in 2030, and with the support from the international, we will try to achieve by 41%. And again, to make that target to be achieved, we set with some national target, both for the mitigation aspect as well as for the adaptation aspect. And we set it into even to our medium-term national medium-term development plan by 2020 to 2024. And we come to climate finance and how we try to determine or identify the need of the financing need to achieve our NDC. And so far, based on our biennial update report in 2018, it seems that we huge amount of fund to achieve our target. It's about 247 billion US dollars, or about 1,400 something trillion rupiah, which is equal to 266 trillion rupiah per year, which is a very, very huge amount of fund that we need to allocate to tackle the issue of climate change. And the national target comprises of 5 different sectors, which are forestry and land use, the energy and transport, industrial processes and product use, or IPPU, the waste and agricultural sectors, where among all of the sectors, the energy and transportation will need the largest part of the fund. It's about 136 billion US dollars. Then from the climate finance perspective, we may separate it. We try to map it into different categories. The first is on the domestic public sources. The second one is the international public sources, and the last one on how we may attract the private sectors due to the huge of the climate funds. We will go to each of part of the sources of the fund. The first from the fiscal policies on climate change and climate finance. The fiscal policies related to climate change actions, we may identify it from the climate budget taking mechanism, which is the mechanism, our national planning and budgeting system to track and identify climate change related output and budget in the central government. So far, we have done with the relevant line ministers on how they allocated their budget to conduct the activities related to the climate change. And from the revenue side, we provide some tax holidays, tax allowance, as well as the VAT, and also from budget transfer, we also provide some regional incentive fund. On the right-hand side of our financial innovative financing related to the climate change. The first is the green sukuk. Indonesia is on in initiating the innovative financing related to the climate change, particularly for the green sukuk. This is a Sharia instrument to finance climate change actions and also achieve SDGs target. The function of the climate budget taking with regard to the green sukuk issuance is that the data coming from the climate budget taking is used as reference or underlying asset for the issuance of green sukuk. This is considerably due to the sukuk needs an underlying asset to be issued. The second one, we have just established the Environmental Fund Agency, which aims to support conservation and environmental management, biodiversity management, as well as addressing the impact of climate change. The third one, we have SDG Indonesia one, which is a blended finance, which also invite the international investors, also facilitate the philanthropic involvement, and allocation green investors, commercial banks, multi MDBs, and etc. So how we take the climate budget in our state budget. The climate budget taking in our ministry was started since 2012, where we carry out several policies of the public fundings for climate change, and was used as the basis for the climate change budgeting activities. Started to 2012 until 2020, where we launched the public climate finance report for fiscal year 2016 until 2018. And since this year, we are developing the regional climate budget taking. So we are started to improve our capacity in developing the climate budget taking and mechanisms. Based on the climate budget taking, since 2018, we issued the first global green sukuk, and in 2019 we also issued the second one, and in the last June we also issued third green sukuk based on the underlying asset on the climate budget taking. And here's the process where on the first line is our medium-term development plan, and it's aligned with our national determined contribution, as well as our national action for mitigation and adaptation. And then the climate budgeting taking is there.
So, Mr. Noor, may I request? I mean, this is very exciting, but if you can kindly expedite a little because we are running a little behind time.
Okay. I have.
Thank you so much.
I have
Sorry for
another.
that.
Yeah. Oh no problem. I have about 2 or 3 slides again, and here is the result that based on our climate budget taking, it reveals that it is allocated about 4% every year in our state budget, and on the average, it's amounted about 83.2 trillion rupiah per year, and okay. And since 2018, the government spending on average contributing to about 25% of national financing needs to achieve our NDC target. Whereas in total, again, every year, we need about 266 trillion rupiah. And here's the sectors that the mitigation based on. There are 5, just as I already mentioned, and also the adaptation sectors based on our adaptation action plan. And here is the in it we have 7 land ministries that are involved in the climate budget taking, and in the adaptation we have about 15 land ministries and agencies that deal with the climate budget taking. So I will go to the this is the result of the climate budget taking. We have sovereign green sukuk financing, and we have couples of takeaways in here. The first is that the climate budget taking is one of the thematic taking in Indonesia's planning and budgeting. It's already mentioned in our regulation. The mechanism aims to identify the amount of budget allocation and budget realization with use to fund mitigation action act from the line ministries. And we use the climate budget taking as the reference for the issuance of any innovative financing, and we also start to conduct the regional climate budget taking from this year. It is expected that the budget taking for the regional side may enhance or improve the capacity of the regional government to also strengthen their budgeting capacity, as well as the opportunity to tap the international funding. And the last but not the least, we are currently developing what the so-called as the CCFF, climate change fiscal framework, that will set out a strategy to meet our NDC, SDG, as well as our LCDI. That's all from me. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Noor, and we'll immediately go to Mr. Rolando from the Department of Budget Management, Philippines. Over to you, Mr. Rolando.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone, or good evening. Okay. Yes, we're happy to share with you our experience in the Philippines as far as climate budget is concerned. Okay, you must know for the past few months have been challenging to all of us. I'm sure we're all struggling in one way or another in fighting the invisible enemy, which is COVID-19. But of course, as a response, we're ensuring that government interventions are directed towards more resilient and better prepared instrumentalities in times of crisis such as this COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, now, of course, like always, the government shall be ready to respond to natural calamities and devise plans for climate change adaptation and mitigation and strengthening risk resiliency in times of disaster. After all, COVID-19 won't stop the onslaught of typhoons, hurricanes, cyclones, and monsoon torrential rains in the coming months. It won't stop flooding, landslide, destruction of properties, and even loss of lives due to these calamities. So COVID-19 won't stop the threats of sea level rise, the destruction of marine ecosystem due to changes in atmosphere, and all other negative effects of climate change. As a matter of fact, well, you must know, just 2 days ago, the Philippines was once again hammered by Typhoon Guni, locally known as, well, after my nickname, Rolly. Leaving destruction in the southern part of Luzon and Visayas, of course, groups, as reported by Yale Climate Connection, Super Typhoon Guni is the strongest tropical cyclone at landfall in the world's history. So it was stronger than Super Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, locally known as the Yolanda, which left significant damages. Okay, now we have so many lessons learned to be learned here. And of course, from the onslaught of Super Typhoon Haiyan, which the preparatory measures and mechanism already put in place, the whole of our country is one in the hope of prayers in the damage of this destructions of Super Typhoon. Guni will not be as great as what we have incurred during that Typhoon Haiyan. Now, also, the UNEP Adaptation Finance Gap Report 2016 warns of increasing impacts and resulting increases in global adaptation costs by 2020, 30 to 2015 that will likely be much higher than the currently expected. Okay, so it gives an indication that the gap between necessary financing to deal with climate includes induced risk and impacts is even bigger than earlier projected. So yeah, but there's much we can do. Extreme vulnerability makes climate action most compelling and urgent, especially in our country. It is an overarching issue that poses challenges and presents opportunities for attaining inclusive growth, shared prosperity, and elevating poverty in the Philippines. Now, the development and implementation of climate budgeting system is a strategic tool to support scaling up and sustain the implementation of our programs, implementation in the Philippines, and transformative agenda. So climate budgeting is one area where we can make lasting impact by ensuring what we invest in climate change adaptation and mitigation. Now, efforts in climate budgeting in the Philippines is legally anchored in Republic Act number 10174 of 2020, or the Climate Change Act, which mandates the Department of Budget and Management undertake the formulation of the annual budget in a way that ensures the appropriate prioritization and allocation of funds to support climate change related programs and projects in the annual program of the government. Now, as a response, various enabling platforms have been enacted to provide foundation for the country's climate change expenditure tagging exercise. So this includes a cooperation of the World Bank, the CPIR, and the issuance of policy instrument for the national and local. You can see here on the screen the CCET has evolved over 3 years of its implementation from issuance of guiding policies in 2013 and 14. They're updating in 2015 to the automation of tagging process and public reporting in 2017 to the beginning of a convergence effort with the risk resiliency program and adjusting to the new normal through its virtual orientation in 2020. So the institutionalization of climate tagging process may be attributed to the following points. I would not expound due to constraint of time. Most likely you can see this because of government leadership, basically both from the DBM, the Department of Budget and Management, and Climate Change Commission. Also, there's flexibility in design is based on real-time application and incorporation of the feedback loops. Also, very important is the capacity building and training, especially those PFM practitioners. And engaging stakeholders throughout the implementation of a key factor in sustaining the momentum. And of course, we will not be in here, or rather, we are right now without even the assistance from our and targeted advisory services, of course, not only the World Bank, from other development partners. Okay, the effectiveness of the climate response requires integration of climate change issues across planning and budgeting cycle, from developing policies to identifying and designing programs to funding and implementing the programs and monitoring and reporting process. So it's really the whole cycle or the loop should be there. For the past year of implementing the climate budgeting, we have integrated into our budget preparation, legislation, and even execution for these various policy instruments have been issued. Okay, so a CCC, or Climate Change Commission Certified Quality Assurance Review form, must be attached to an annex of an agency climate budget proposal. So that's as far as budget preparation is concerned. before it's considered to be complete and subsequently reviewed. This policy is clearly stated in our national budget call, documenting guiding agencies in the preparation of their budget. So this submission of the certified QAR is crucial in ensuring quality climate budget submission, their alignment with national climate goals, and of course, providing information for the improvement of climate budgeting. Okay, this is very important. This is also one. In order to encourage more prudent and targeted spending, the program convergence budgeting approach was adopted by the government, where several agencies work as one to meet common objective instead of competing for budgets. Okay, under this, in the case of the climate budgeting, it is the Risk Resiliency Program, which is the framework program for strengthening the resilience of natural ecosystem and the adaptive capacity of vulnerable communities. So rather, the RRP, we call it RRP, is the implementing program of our climate change adaptation and mitigation disaster risk reduction cluster roadmap 2018 to 2022. Okay, so the roadmap has an overall goal of building climate and disaster resilient communities, supporting equitable and sustainable development through achievement of 4 outcomes, that is increased adaptive capacities of vulnerable communities, ensured adequate supply of clean air, water, and other natural resources, increase of critical infrastructure, and enhanced knowledge, of course. Now, translating the roadmap into program and project investment, the Risk Resilience Program focuses on the following areas. One is community livelihood and enterprise community program, integrated water resources management program, enhancing coastal protection program, climate and disaster information services program, and seismic resiliency program. Okay, so the planning and preparation of programs and projects by agencies under RRP affects its implementation readiness and are therefore given higher priority funding under the fiscal space as stated in the annual budget priorities framework. So the budget priorities framework is being issued annually. It's guiding the agencies on where they're going to prioritize the available fiscal space. Now, in addition, we have institutionalized the budgeting system through the pertinent general provisions of the Annual Appropriations Act, measures that will ensure that programs and projects included in the national budget are implemented in consideration of disaster risk reduction and climate change mitigation. Moreover, section 26 of this section 26 of the general provision reads that in the design and construction of government facilities, the agency concerned and the Department of Public Works and Highways shall ensure that the facilities can withstand wind speed 300 kilometers per hour, withstand moderate seismic activity at least 8 magnitude in Richter scale, utilize natural ventilation and rainwater through the inclusion of rainwater catchment investing system, and in the selection of the site, the DPWH and the agency concerned shall consider site stability and susceptibility to landslide or flooding in the latest vulnerability and risk assessment and geohazard maps of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. So, as you can see, there's places no government facility shall be located on no-build zone area. Now,
Mr. Rolando, sorry, we are behind time. I'll just request if you can kindly
there's just one thing that I want to highlight. This is the policy instrument of Green Public Procurement Roadmap. So this is a new one that is being implemented now in the Philippines. So you can see in the slide, just give you that one. Now, probably the emerging message we can hear to you is the climate budgeting is recognized in the Philippines nationally determined contributions as a means of implementation to enhance resilience and promote mitigation efforts. Enhancing convergence in all levels of government financing is a top priority, and also investing in more effective and scale in a critical priority. And of course, planning, implementation, and operational framework is very important in terms of implementation. Now, also we have identified our other challenges, capacity building. Yes, we have to continue training our staff or people, stakeholders, increasing tagging compliance and accuracy, and of course, synchronizing national and local climate budgeting, because right now we're planning to devolve some other functions of our climate-related programs and projects. And of course, moving forward, the DBM, the CCC have been coordinating with creation of knowledge product. We have started this one in 2016, and we will continue doing this, particularly providing, of course, the brief climate budget brief and guidelines on the mainstreaming of climate budgeting and planning. So I guess I'll end from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rolando. I mean, both the presentations were really enriching and a lot for us to learn. So now I will request Ms. Carole and Celine from the Budget Directorate, France. And France has recently, I think, issued a green budget. So we'll hear from Ms. Carole about the experience in France, and then we'll subsequent to that we'll have a question and answer session. And please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. And the question and answer session will be moderated by Khunchol. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Carole.
Carole? Oh, yeah, okay. I don't know if you can hear me, but I cannot hear anything. Is it the same for everybody, or?
Also not here, but she seems to be unmuted.
So I think that there's some technical issue. I'll suggest that we go to the question and answers, and after the question and answers, we'll again request Ms. Carole to make her presentation. So over to you, Khunchol, for the question and answers.
All right. So thank you very much. So we've got two presentations from Pak Noah Saifuddin from Indonesia and Mr. Roland Toledo from the Philippines. So now the floor is open. We've got the first question in from Mr. Ahsan Kundi from Pakistan. Mr. Kundi, would you like to repeat your question verbally as well? Please feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I can read it out for you as well. Okay, so the first question from Mr. Kundi, I'm not sure to what presenters. So the question is, what are the key considerations and parameters to green budgeting? And more specifically, the countries that have already adopted climate budget reforms and have incorporated environmental assessment as mandatory requirements in the budget process, what key measures do you suggest for these countries' transition to green budgeting? So perhaps maybe both Pak No and Mr. Rolando, if you would like to comment on or respond to this question. Please go ahead, please.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, for that question. I guess the key considerations of what to consider in the climate budgeting is, of course, that is responsive to what we are planning to achieve, which is the climate adaptation and mitigation. And basically, those are considered in basically from the typology that's shared, that's guiding us in or for us to tag our budget. So those are considerations basically in determining what should be considered in the budget. But of course, not just only that, but if I think the main concern here right now is there should be an ownership of the bureaus or concerned bureaucracy, and at the same time, it should be owned by the institution themselves so that it will not be prone to political issues or rather change of administration. So I guess that's from my end, that's I can respond to the question of Mr. Kunti.
Yes. Thank you for the question. It's very interesting topic to discuss actually. This is what I'm thinking about the transition to the green budgeting. That first we need to be very clear about the national target with regard to the issue, the term of green. So we may have a couple of indicators that we want to achieve or to set as the target with regard to the green. For experience in the climate budget taking, we make the term of mitigation and adaptation into the activities and output that the line ministries may target it for their budget. So then, if we want to transit from the climate change budget taking into the green budget taking, then we need to have agreement in the some indicators as well as the of the term green in this regard, because the green itself will not just cover the issue of climate change, but also I think be related more on the and economic other economic activities, and how we may have a good transition from the climate change climate budget budgeting into the green budgeting. Again, I second the idea from our Philippine
Yes, this is a test.
that we need to improve our capacity and first because we need a couple of strong capacities and as well to strengthen the national target from just attaining achieving the climate change target, as well as we need to make a bigger or larger effort to achieve the green target in the future. Then this is the basically the key aspect that we need to have to move from climate budgeting to the green budgeting. This is my.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Noor and Mr. Rolando. Maybe with the interest of time, perhaps let's do a final round. We've got a question from Claude as well. Claude, would you like to jump in, and maybe we can have another burning question before we go back to France? Claude, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I will ask my question. And indeed, the question is this chat is more directed towards Rolly. It's about the role of the Climate Change Commission, which was described as playing a role in assessing budget submissions from line ministries and agencies as part of the budget formulation process. And I wondered if Rolly could tell us a bit more about this process. How does it happen? What are the concrete results? And how is it made compatible with the time constraints of the budget formulation process, which we know in every country are very challenging? Thank you very much.
All right. Yeah, I think, okay. Thank you for that question. Yeah, Claude. Excuse me. Yeah, before the agencies submit their budget to the DBM, they're making sure that it passes through the Climate Change Commission for review if those are programs and projects that pertaining to climate change adaptation and mitigation. So the submission of the QAR to the or the budget form is attached to our national budget circular. This is the national budget call. So it's attached to our budget call, and it's required by the it's a requirement for the agencies to submit that in terms of their submission of the budget. So it's also included in our calendar when they have to submit the forms. Basically, that is because we're right now on what we call online submission of proposed budget. So that is also being submitted online. But also right now we're doing the parallel one. So that's what the Climate Change Commission is doing. Basically checking the programs and projects that is enrolled for climate change adaptation, making sure that they're aligned with the National Action Plan, NCCAP, National Climate Action Plan, and of course, from our strategy that is being prepared. So that's how our QAR form is being submitted, or rather filled up by the agencies. That's how it works. Thank you.
All right, I think so now maybe it's a good time to go back to Ms. Carol Anselin for the presentation on France experience. If there's no further questions on the Philippines and
yeah, if it's possible, I have one question.
Yeah. Okay, please go ahead. Maybe this is the last one then.
Yes, okay, thank you. It's just about the Climate Change Commission. I had the same question as Claude, but I just wanted to know, because the Commission, it can have access to all the data of the budget of all agencies, etc., before giving the score. It's it's the same as the budget data, or they have other information?
Is this question for both presenters or?
No, it's just about the Climate Change Commission for Philippines.
For the Philippines, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Could you repeat the question quickly? I think Ms. Rolando.
Yes, sure. Does the Climate Change Commission have access to the data for the budget, but also for agencies and for ministries, etc.?
Yes, the Climate Change Commission has an access to our online submission of budget, or the system that we are providing them. Yes, they have an access to that because they are the one who will review the quality assurance review form approved by the Climate Change Commission as prescribed in our GMC, which will be submitted as an annex to this to our form, which is the BP form 201, or climate change expenditure. So they have the access to that one. So if that is a question, access, yes. And also the agencies, that is also, they have an access to that. Okay. And of course, that will be reported eventually to our, of course, the BSF, or rather the budget of expenditures and sources of financing that is being submitted to Congress for deliberation.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer.
Okay, all right, thanks very much. So Carol, if you are ready, maybe please go ahead. We are running a little behind, yes. So if you could stay within the 7-minute time allocation, that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm so sorry, I brought some headphones so you can hear me well. So here is a presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. Margot, who is Deputy Head of the Research and Higher Education Unit, and I, Head of the Fiscal Policy Unit at the Budget Directorate, will give you an overview of the making of the first green budget in France. So first of all, where did the initiative come from? in December 2017 at the One Planet Summit held in Paris. France engages in Paris Collaborative on Green Budgeting under the aegis of the OECD. But the real first steps were made in 2019, and it went really quickly. In April, the Climate Cabinet launches a joint methodological works by audit bodies of finance and ecological transition ministries. In June, there were big pressure from the parliament because the Energy and Climate Law requests a report on the positive and negative impact of the budget bill on climate change. And then in September, the report written by the audit bodies I referred to was issued and publicly presented. It proposes, in fact, an expenditure scoring method applied to a part of the 2019 budget, not the 2020. And I will present this method to you in the following slides. And during the public presentation, the finance minister made the commitment to publish the first comprehensive green budget in October 2020 as part of the 2021 draft finance bill. So it was quite a challenge for everyone. And to achieve this objective, we set up an interdepartmental team. So budget, treasury, tax legislation for the finance side, and the Ministry for Ecological Transition. We're working together, assessing all the government expenditures that will be in the 2021 draft budget bill. And the methodology was also submitted to a consultation with academics and civil society. And in October 2020, that was it, the first comprehensive green budget in France. If we have a look to the method and really quickly, what we can say that it provides an assessment of the green impact of all state budget expenditures. That means both CapEx and OpEx. So it is 488 billion euros in 2021, but also it covers tax expenditures, so 86 billion euros in 2021. And what is important is that it reflects not only concerns related to climate change, but also other environmental concerns. For example, you have the 6 environmental concerns rating over here, and we put a score to every budget expenses on climate change adaptation, circular economy and waste, pollution abatement, biodiversity, and so on. Not only climate change, which is 1/3 of the scoring. And what we do also is that we put a score not only for expenditures that are in favor of the environment, but also the one that have a negative impact. If we have a look to the scoring, each expense is therefore given a score from -1 to +3. +1 to +3 are favorable expenses, and it can be favorable for different reasons. You can have environmentally targeted expenses, but you can also have not explicit environmental targeted expenses, but that have indirect positive impact on environment. And you can also have, and most of the expenditures are like that. They are favorable, but also controversial. Actually, you can have, for example, bonus for cars. it has a positive impact on the environment, but you buy a new car. So there is a risk of long-term technology lock-in for using car that are using fuels instead of electrical cars. And now I will give the floor to Margot, who will present to you the way in which research and higher education expenditures have been rated.
Thank you very much, Carol. So yes, for us, as you know, the various offices of the Budget Directorate were involved in the rating at the very start of the process. So the methodology was discussed upstream before classifying it by mission and different programs. So as you can imagine, and I think it's the same for you in every country, some programs were more difficult to rank than others. And for example, for the higher education and research mission, which is one of the largest of French national budget because it's 28 billion in 2021 for the budget, and it contains 10 different programs, as research, higher education, but also students' life, space, research, etc., etc. And so for this mission, it was kind of difficult because the green classification, for example, for higher education, should have included real estate and fluids expenses, and which was not being done because these expenses did not fall within the methodology adopted by the working group at the first time of the classification. So this program, for example, will therefore be refined in the coming years, and I think it forces also a mission to do it. And also the classification could be difficult because the French national budget includes a large number of agencies. And as I saw in the Philippines presentation, I think it was the kind of difficulties too to manage a classification for those agencies. And for example, the research program includes more than 25 agencies, and it's just for one program. So you can imagine for one mission. So for one program, the research program, it was 25 agencies and international organizations, such as, for example, the European Space Agency. And it was therefore necessary to perform a ranking based on the amount of the subvention which is paid by the budget to each agency. So the ranking has been carefully developed with each agency to create a specific grid. So it was kind of big work with all those agencies. And we did a live work with them since March 2020 to establish a distribution by type of expenditure and environmental goals, as Carol said before, because we had the classification -1 to 3, and also by different kind of environmental goals. So we have to deal this with all agencies. After this ranking has been reviewed with the supervisory ministry, and finally we applied all the methodology to the data communicated for the 2021 finance bill, with the aim of having an updated ranking based on a robust methodology. And this method allows a detailed feedback of expenses with a clear budget chaining in for example 2020, but also for 2021, because we do not want to change the methodology every year. So we need a clear budget chaining without the need for too frequent and time-consuming updates with the agencies and ministry, and for us too, for the administration. So, and the objective is also educational, because when it is relevant, the exchanges make it possible to clarify the rating or the methodology. If, for example, the expenditure is weighted at mixed, for example, for the nuclear support expenditure, because you can imagine that the nuclear waste, they are not good for the environment, but the electricity is good. And also, for example, for the launchers, for the space research, the launchers, they are not classified as good. They are classified as not good for the environment. And so we needed to we need to have a review with the ministry and the agency to be okay for this classification. I give back the floor to Carol.
Within 1 to 2 minutes, please. We need to wrap it up. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about
so
that.
if we have a look to, no, that's okay. If we have a look to the main results, so out of a total of 574 billion euros in budget and tax expenditures, we tagged as 53 billion euros of expenditure that have an impact on the environment. It's mainly favorable, but you can see there is a difference between credit allocation and tax expenditures. Tax expenditures are mainly so-called brown, I don't know if it's right to say that, brown expenditures, because you have a lot of tax reductions on fuels. Margot, maybe you can go on with the results on higher education and research.
Yes, sure, thank you. So as you can see, within the research and higher education mission, the expenditure having a favorable impact on environmental objectives represent 3.4 billion. And you can see that 2 billion is for the research, 0.3 billion for the space research program. This is because we have the launchers inside, so and they're not good for the environment. And you have 1.1 billion for the higher education program. But for example, as I told you before, for the higher education program, we cannot have the floods and also the real estate reforms. So the methodology, but we have to know it. And we wrote in the report that the methodology was not the same for this program, but it will be the same for the years to come. But these expenses makes it possible to finance diversified kind of projects. And for us, it was a really good information also, and a better information to understand how all the agencies are working. And for the green spendings, for example, we could classify environment and biodiversity, ecosystem dynamic studies, etc., for each kind of agencies. So I give to you the different kind of studies for different type of agencies, for example, the national research agencies, the European Space Agency, etc. And as I told you before, within the missions, expenses related to space launches program were recorded as having a negative impact on the environment. And it was also for nuclear CEA activities, and it was both favorable impact and unfavorable in the waste classification.
To conclude, can the green budget be a decision-making tool? We do not have yet enough insight for using it during a full budgetary procedure, but what we can see is that it had an impact on designing our recovery plan. The French recovery plan, so it's 100 billion euros, had to be green. It was a strong commitment of the president and of all the members of the government. As you can see, it's not full green because as you can imagine, some measures has to be neutral because we don't know yet if it will have an impact or it's neutral by essence. So it's not full green, but with the green budget tagging, we achieved to avoid any request for expenditures that was considered as harmful for the environment. So to put it in a nutshell, green budget tagging constitutes a real novel methodological contribution. It's a real commitment to transparency and climate and environmental action. Because right now we have a lot of NGOs, institutions in France asking us clarification on one part of the tagging and wants to be part of the next year challenge to the 2022 green budget. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, and if I can add something, as Carol said, for us it's really a super tool to use, and for the next negotiation with all the ministries, it can be really, really important to use it and to negotiate about the goals and all the goals we want to be developed.
Okay, thanks very much, Carol and Margot, for sharing your experience. Which is France is definitely one of the best practices out there. So let's allow maybe 1 or 2 questions at most on France. If anyone wants to come in, please go ahead. I don't see any question on the chat box. So.
Maybe it was really clear, but don't hesitate.
Okay. Anyone question? If not, I'm going to hand over back to Asad at UNDP.
Thanks, Funchal, and thanks, Margot and Carol, for your presentation. It was, and also for highlighting this greening aspect, which is call of the day. So I'll now go to Suren and to Funchal for a very quick presentation, highlighting some of the knowledge products that the UNDP, for instance, has developed, and of course those knowledge products actually are an outcome of the peer-to-peer learning, the experiences that we are now hearing, learning from the countries, and capturing some of those experiences in the guidance note. So, and that has been, has accelerated the reforms that have been happening in Asia Pacific. So over to you, Suren, for a very quick brief.
Thank you, Asa. Thank you, colleagues. I'll run through the slides. I appreciate the time is very short. So in this presentation, I'll just quickly present how what kind of toolkit and what kind of guidance the UNDP has been providing on climate change finance, how to integrate climate change into the budget cycle in various parts of the budget cycle, and then how it evolves to wider, more green budgeting components, and then finally how it is linked with SDG budgeting. So why I'll actually skip this slide, most of it, but the main purpose of this slide is to say that there are special efforts need to be made by ministers of finance, by central budget authorities and other organizations, line ministries, parliaments, to start seeing the climate change or green budget, because standard classifications don't capture it. There are no standard, some of the SDGs, some of the climate and green budget related aspects are cross-sectoral, so they are not easy to capture in education or other with standard classification items like COFOC. In many cases, we don't have a clear political mandate for these areas. Even if the information is available, there is no political person who will actually support the ideas, promote the ideas, and advocate for increasing budget allocations for those. And outcomes, in many cases, are much more difficult to measure and present during the budget negotiations or accountability framework. So I will not go into details of individual tools, but the 5 primary objectives that we were pursuing were first to help governments to understand actually how much they themselves spent on climate change, because that information was not available to governments. Then to make sure that climate change becomes visible in the budget documents, helping with mobilizing more budget resources towards climate change using various tools like green bonds, engaging parliament, budget scrutiny, CC climate change budget tagging, etc., etc. Increasing accountability via using climate change budget reporting, collaborative research on what is the impact of the expenditures, and also bridging the climate change planning with regular budgeting processes through climate change financing frameworks. So we were using the evolutionary sort of ladder of this by starting helping governments to become informed about these things, then engaging and convincing most important stakeholders, enabling the executive line ministries and other partners on sort of providing the supply side of the information. So finally, we get to this improved climate change budget decision and accountability. And in order to achieve this, we were using these tools that you can see afterwards also when the presentation will be shared. And then, while gradually we started to be engaged in some other aspects, not only climate change, but also biodiversity, gender, poverty, human rights, that kind of aspects that are also relevant to SDG framework. And for the last 5 years, we also started to expand the same toolkit or the same approaches for governments and ministers of finance to be more informed about SDGs during their budgeting processes. And for that, we were using almost the same set of toolkits. So with rapid integrated assessments, development finance assessments, SDG financing framework, SDG budget tagging, SDG budget circulars and templates. And I'll stop for a second on this because there were so many questions about the actual example, live example, how some of the new tools have been informing the actual budget decisions. In Mongolia, Ministry of Finance introduced new SDG budget template. And Ministry of Environment, actually, which is linked to this green budgeting topic of today, Ministry of Environment was one of the pilot ministries, and Ministry of Finance allocated time in the budget calendar to specifically meet separately with the Ministry of Environment before the budget decisions were made. So they were using these SDG templates to argue about what additional benefits the country will receive, what are the outcomes and outputs for additional funding. So they allocated time in the budget calendar. They sat together, decided upon new allocations, and those allocations were funded by the parliament. So this is an example how this small new tool has been applied to increase the allocation towards the climate agenda. And then we, again, other tools like SDG Citizen Budget, SDG Expenditure Trend Analysis, and what is emerging now is also SDG Audit, which we at UNDP have not yet provided any guidance on these things, but it's an emerging topic that will also appear soon. In some countries have already done it. So UNDP has broken down their service offers into 4 main areas. How to align SDGs with medium-term and annual budget policies, how to strengthen budget expenditure monitoring and reporting, how to strengthen accountability, and how to analyze the impact of budget allocations. So with this, as I said, I'll have to run through the slides. I want to thank you, but also want to mention that on the left side, you see the guidance note developed by UNDP, which is called Knowing What You Spent. This is on the climate change finance specifically. And on the right hand, you see the very fresh budgeting for SDGs guidance note, which is again uploaded into this website. So you all can visit and get some fresh materials from this website. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Suren. Asad, I think it's time for us to wrap up. And my name's Tom Bilo. I'm coming in from New York and joining this discussion. It's been absolutely fantastic, I must say. But before I deliver some closing remarks and some ideas around moving forward, and before my colleague from the IMF delivers their remarks, I just wanted to hand over the virtual mic to our colleague Sean from the UK government. As you know, the UK is hosting COP26, and of course there is a finance track to that, a finance campaign to COP26. And Sean, I wonder if you want to share a few reflections from the discussion and any connect that could be made with that that track to COP26. Sean?
Thank you very much, Tom. And I'll be very glad to, and I'll try and keep this short. But just to say how much I enjoyed the presentations, learned a lot, and there's clearly a great depth of work going on. And so it's important to continue to support and disseminate lessons from all of this kind of work, which is why, you know, along with the Swedish government, we've been very happy to have supported the work of the Climate Finance Network. But as you said, Tom, I wanted to just take this opportunity to just link this agenda a little bit to the COP26 agenda, which is UK co-hosting with the government of Italy. As you all know, the COP has now been moved to November 2021 because of the the pandemic, which is a shame in terms of international climate action, but at least it gives more time to prepare, make sure we have a sufficiently ambitious set of actions and proposals from the world. And just to say, I mean, for the UK, I mean, clearly the overarching objective of the COP is to push for really higher levels of ambition, both on mitigation and on adaptation and resilience. So that'll be the overarching objective. But within that and under that, I mean, for the UK, we've identified 5 campaigns. So campaigns, as we're calling them, on specific themes which we consider particularly important. And the rationale for this campaign-based approach is to really galvanize the international community to try and get commitments to new initiatives and partnerships in these areas being launched, or just sharing of really good experiences and practices. Of the 5 campaigns, just to briefly run through, one of them is energy transition, so transitioning away from fossil fuels and coal towards clean energy. Second one is adaptation and resilience. The third one is nature, which we clearly see as inextricably linked to the climate agenda, making sure that natural environments are sustainably managed, land use, forestry, agriculture, and so on. The 4th campaign is zero emission vehicles. But the 5th campaign is finance. So that really is an underpinning campaign, and that we see that as an enabler for the whole agenda, really. So what we're trying to do, and the main objectives, I won't go through all of it, but some of the focus areas of the finance campaign. I mean, one major objective is to increase the mobilization of climate finance. So we really need, as an international community, as developed countries, need to demonstrate that we're delivering on the commitment to $100 billion of climate finance annually by 2020. And within that, in order to do that, I think we really, as the UK, will be looking to the donor community and bilateral donors to make increased commitments over a multi-year predictable period for climate finance. And within that, I think to increase the share going to adaptation and resilience, which has probably been somewhat neglected. And also we'll be looking to the multilateral development banks, national development banks, development finance institutions to really align their portfolios and lending with the Paris Agreement. There's also a big focus on private investment, so catalyzing more private investment for climate action through de-risking, blended finance, for example, public-private partnerships, looking at new products. So these are all part of what we'll be looking to push in under the finance campaign. So really, I guess the question then is, where does green budgeting fit into all of this? And I would say there's perhaps 2 ways to look at that. One is that we need to recognize that I've talked about international public finance and I've talked about private finance, but to recognize that domestic public finance is a huge part of the picture, and to make sure we keep the focus on looking at the effectiveness of that source of finance. But the second thing is, I think, looking at green budgeting and domestic national budgets as a way to leverage both international public finance, for example, direct access or budget financing for climate action, and secondly, leveraging private finance. And we've heard, I think, a lot of good examples of the way that budgets, policies, and processes can be used, not just to finance channel public financing, but to really encourage and catalyze private finance. So I do see that all of this is very relevant to the finance campaign, but maybe we need to do more to really take that to the COP and sell that agenda perhaps more than it has been up to now as a really important part of the picture. So I would say, just in closing, that we're still really in the market for ideas and suggestions for how the finance campaign should be taken forward, and we're looking for inputs and views and thinking as we refine that. But I think we'll be very happy to work with UNDP, the IMF and others to see whether we can take some of this really great experience that's out there and showcase some of this and use it to really push forward the finance goals for the COP. So I will end there. Thank you, and back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Sian, so much. And yes, let's continue to talk all together around how we can bring the assets of the Climate Finance Network, the experiences from the Asia Pacific to support the finance campaign moving forward. I certainly see the element of leverage as an important part of the assets that can be brought to bear from the experience in the region, and also the issue of effectiveness, which I think will be critical. But before, again, I share some closing remarks, and I pass over, I think, after myself to Claude from the IMF. I think, Chon, did you want to just say a little bit around the work that you're taking forward? Can Chon?
Yep, thank you very much, Tom. So we're running super late, so if you can give me just 3 minutes, I'm just gonna walk you through very quickly. Let me share my screen. Yep, so I mean, like, we have a range of relevant tools at the IMF, but today I'm just gonna share a couple of tools. One is on the Public Investment Management Assessment module on climate change, PIMA-CC, and the second one is on the SDG costing tool as well. So in the interest of time, I'm just gonna do a very quick flyover. But before that, just a bit of the background. Basically, we know that public investment and public spending play a key role in providing public services and boosting economic growth. A couple of months ago, the fund just published a book that you saw on the upper right-hand corner or on the slide, Well Spent, which argues for the need to spend more and spend better as well. Basically, we know that we need to increase the size of the investment as well as the quality of the investment. Now, looking forward, we have challenges such as attaining the SDGs by 2030. We have climate-related risks looming as well in a medium term and longer term. So basically, we think of how we're going to help countries in building capacity to address this kind of climate change and sustainable development challenges. And the PIMA-CC and the SDG costing tool is going to help countries plan for public investment that is properly adjust for climate risk, for example, as well as to help align the fiscal framework with SDG and climate goals as well. So this slide basically shows the overview of the PIMA-CC tool. I'm not going to dive into too much detail, but basically the IMF has done the PIMA assessment in over 60 countries now to look at assessing the quality and strength of public investment management in specific countries. We developing currently the climate change module, which is embedded in the PIMA framework to look at the relevant aspect of public investment management that is climate sensitive, basically from the planning stage to the coordination aspect between different public entities, looking at how the government could improve project appraisal and selection, taking into account climate and transition risk, going down all the way to portfolio management, which focuses on ex-post review of investment, and also on the risk management aspect, which consider both the fiscal risk from climate change as well as disaster risk management as well. So I'm gonna go through very quickly here in terms of the milestone. We still at an initial stage. Module is going to be completed pretty soon, and we're going to go through a phase of testing in 6 to 8 countries with pilot missions as well, and hopefully to finalize and roll out the PIMA-CC to around June next year. Moving on quickly to the SDG costing tool. Basically, what we've done here is to build on the methodology that the fund has developed a couple of years ago on the costing methodology of SDG, focusing on the 5 sectors, including health, education, infrastructure, involving energy, water and sanitation, and in terms of the road transport as well. And most recently, we extended this costing methodology to incorporate the climate resilient aspect as well, to look at, incremental spending that will be needed to cover things like infrastructure rehabilitation, infrastructure upgrade, maintenance, and so on, taking into account future climate risk. And basically, just to share with you an illustrative result from this kind of tool, looking at the additional costs to meet SDG in different regions, and we have sectoral breakdown as well, as you can see on the slide. Going to wrap up already here, but if you have questions or interest on PIMA-CC or the SDG costing tool, we can follow up after the workshop as well. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much, John. Also, thanks to Suren for your presentation on some of the support and guidance that UNDP is developing. Let me just say very few remarks. It's been a long session. I think the session has proved the importance of continuing this type of exchange across peers, engaging with the agenda of green budgeting. It is a new area, as many people have said, but at the same time, it is an area where we're seeing a huge amount of activity, and we're seeing a great harvest of innovations across countries taking very different reform roadmaps, as it were, to the agenda, looking at reforms across the budget cycle, looking, as Asad said at the beginning, both bottom-up and top-down approaches to the reform. So there's a wealth of experience and innovation to draw from. As our colleague, though, at the IMF said at the beginning, I think it's important that as we continue these exchanges, we continue to be more and more honest and frank with each other around the challenges. I think we hear a lot around progress being made, but perhaps less around where things have not gone quite so well, where we have achieved perhaps less than we had hoped with the reforms. So let's continue the exchange in the spirit of trying to learn from each other. And I think today we've learned a great deal from each other. Just one area, perhaps, again, to bring more focus in our exchange moving forward, perhaps a bit more attention to the issue of measuring and identifying change across different axes. I think we've heard in the chat a number of times a request for, so what really changed on the ground? And perhaps from the conversation, I would identify 3 axes of change. The first axis that I think we're actually paying quite a lot of attention to is changes in systems and processes, where we're seeing public financial management information systems incorporate climate change, budget circulars, budget proposals, expenditure reports, even audit is being mentioned. So there's a good focus on changes in systems and processes, which is fundamental, of course, to integrating the climate agenda and green concerns into the budget. We're perhaps seeing a little less focus on actual changes in budgetary allocations and expenditures. We're seeing, and I think hearing, some anecdotal evidence of where budget negotiations have shifted because of an integration of a climate concern. We've heard a bit about an incremental expenditure resulting from an incorporation of an adaptation concern in a public investment. And certainly we've heard of medium-term budgetary frameworks bringing in allocations around climate change. So we're seeing on that axis some degree of focus, perhaps less than on the changes in systems and processes. But finally, on the actual impact of our expenditures, the impact of our investments, I think we're seeing perhaps even less focus. And that's probably where we need to pay most attention if we're really to bring the evidence to bear to advocate for the changes that we all in this virtual room think so important. I found the presentation from Fiji at the beginning so powerful in taking an approach of demonstrating how a 9% increment in an investment had such a strong economic return and spillover and spin-off effect in terms of community investment and perhaps even private sector investment. How can we bring these micro stories together in a more aggregate and macro level way? I think that's a challenge for us moving forward. So the second area that I think has come out from the conversation, which perhaps we need to look at as we move forward in our dialogue, is the degree of comprehensiveness in what we term as climate or green budgeting. I think we've seen, a differing focus on adaptation and mitigation just in the field of climate. But then I think that the powerful presentation from France was how important it is to look at environment alongside climate change, how we can have both positive impacts or positive expenditures on climate adaptation, which may have negative impacts on environmental management. So these relationships across the different elements of green budgeting are important to look at. And I'm not sure yet how comprehensive we all are in our approaches to this, which leads me to Søren's presentation, which was taken us even further by including issues of equity and moving us towards budgeting for sustainable development in a more comprehensive way. This may be also a frontier we want to look at in our conversations. So let me wrap up by saying, what next from our side? I think for UNDP and the Climate Finance Network in Asia Pacific, we're certainly thinking, how do we take the conversation forward? Can we have a continued exchange across countries, perhaps even focusing in the next stage, particularly on effectiveness and impact? I think that we're seeing that powerful collaboration with other partners like the IMF in this space is critical. How can we bring our collective assets together at the country level as we move this agenda forward? So we look forward to collaboration further with our colleagues from the IMF as well. So great thanks to you at the IMF, to the UK and Sweden for their support, and most of all to all of you from the governments of the region in providing us with so much wealth of experience and thought for future action moving forward. And with that, Claude, I think I'm handing over to you. Is that right?
Yeah, I will be very brief, just to thank indeed all participants for their insights. It was an incredibly rich and informative session. And indeed, well, I think you outlined the main messages, and we are on the side of the IMF as eager as you to continue this conversation of how to increase the effectiveness and the ultimate impact of green budgeting practices. So some issues were discussed today, some points were made repeatedly: the importance of capacity, the importance of political ownership, the importance of the cross-cutting work with the environmental ministry or agency or climate watchdog, and these were all important points. But indeed, ultimately, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating and will be in the actual impact on climate change and on the environment. And here, to sustain political momentum and political impetus to bring forward this green budgeting, what will be needed is indeed an evidence-based proof and stories about indeed how this really helps to change the allocation in the budget and ultimately to achieve the environmental goal. And this is in this respect that it fits in the overall conversation. with regard to the COP26, as the point was already also made very clearly by our friend from the UK government. So I'll stop here and just finish indeed by thanking very much all participants for spending 2.5 hours with us on this very important topic. Thank you.
Great. Thanks to everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.